Good morning, good morning. Gee, it's great to start your fun Friday with coffee with Karma today. Good morning and welcome to Fun Friday here on Coffee with Karma. I am Karma Spence and I help entrepreneurs write a lead attracting, client attracting book in 90 days or less. And everyone needs a little whimsy in their life. Now, I'm going to be sharing with you today 5 things you should probably already be doing, but I'm going to give them a whimsical spin to make them a little more fun because why not? It's Fun Friday, right? So let's get started. Thing number one. Okay, maybe you shouldn't necessarily be doing this, but this is a fun way to get your creative writers juice flowing, and I call it word weaving wizardry. I should have brought my little wand. Shh. Anyway, the idea behind this is you have like all these words on pieces of paper and you put them in a fancy hat. Could be a conical hat with little stars and moons on them, or it could just be a jar. Honestly, it could be a jar, but decorate the jar with little wizardry, fun, whimsical designs. Get creative. Bring out your puff paint. Anyway, once a week, you take a word out of that jar and you challenge yourself to craft a short piece incorporating that book. So I'm gonna just this just happens to be a book that I bought and it arrived today. I'm going to randomly choose a word from it. The word is Joe because it's talking about Joe Sugarman. That's not really a word. That's a name. We're gonna do it again. All right. Doop, bonk. I landed on another name. Come on. He must be name dropping everywhere. Okay, rely. There we go. So I rely on what do I rely on? That would be a much more I can't come up with something. I rely on the kindness of strangers. That's what first came to my mind, and I don't really. But there you go. So you just pull out a word and come up with something. And what this does is it helps you stretch out of things. So for example, I could take that word rely and I could weave an entire like thought leadership piece about what is it that we rely on? Do we rely on ourselves? Do we rely on God? Do we rely on all the above? What does it mean to rely? See, I chose a random word in a book, really, and I was able to come up with some ideas of what I could write about. That's something you could do. Word weaving wizardry. Idea number two. This is called an idea incubator. And it's similar. What you do is whenever you have an idea, when you come across an idea, when you have an idea, you write it down and you put it in the jar. Just put it in the jar so that it's not floating around in your head, taking up time. Maybe that isn't you, but it's definitely me. I'm one of these people that's like, I have an idea, and then I go and implement it, and then which takes me away from the things I need to be doing now. It's like, so this is actually an idea that I'm thinking of implementing myself. Is like when I have an idea, you stick it in a jar, and then and this can be interesting facts. In fact, actually, I do kind of do this online. Many, many years ago, I had this, word a day calendar, and they were all like obscure words. And whenever I would come up across a word, I thought, "Ooh, that's a juicy." I could think of a short story around that word. I literally have a folder on my computer that has little text files, each text file being a unique word. Um, the first one I'm remembering it was the word fish fag. A fish fag was the wife of a fishmonger who was really annoying and basically was a nag. And so I came up with this whole idea, I haven't written it yet, but called The Curse of the Fish Fag. It's like it just sounded cool. And I'm just thinking like, maybe she turns into a fish or something. I don't know. But it's like I would take these. There was another one about the sin eater. I thought that was a really cool idea. I did some research on sin. And so in that folder along with that word is if I came up with research, around that word and what it inspired in me, I would put it in there. So I've got a virtual idea incubator jar, but it might also be a good idea for me to have a physical idea jar, which actually I just thought of something I kind of do right under my computer. Anyway, it's really good whenever you get those little sparks, but you can't implement it right now, stick it in the idea incubator jar. Idea number 3, sensory writing sessions. This is partially inspired by, um, there's actually a methodology that uses this to help calm you down when you're like freaking out. And that is, you think 5, well, I think it's 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you taste, or something. There's an order like that. But this is kind of inspired by that, but it's not that. What sensory writing sessions are is pick a sense, one of the 5 senses, or if you want, you can include the 6th, but basically we're talking about, so let's say sight, and you write a piece. It could be on what you're writing about. I mean, you could, let's say you're writing about how to use Twitter to market a book. You could write everything you can think of about that topic that is visual. Then write everything about that topic that you can think of that is auditory. You hear it. Then write everything about that topic that you can smell. That one might be a little more challenging. Can you smell what Twitter's got cooking? I don't know. Then do the same thing with taste and then touch. And what this does is it helps you hone your sensory writing skills. It helps expand what you're writing. And you may not use everything you write here, but it gets your creative juices flowing. And if you do that like maybe twice a month, it could really get you writing deeper and just more. It can get you writing more often, more deeply, and who knows what will come out of that, just like with the idea incubator. Number 4, now this was something, pause for a moment before I go on to number 4. I was going to start this podcast with this. What does whimsy mean? So that we're all on the same page, right? It's it's playfully quaint or fanciful behavior or humor. It's a whim. It's a thing that is fanciful or odd. So, all of these things that I've been talking about may not be what you initially thought was whimsical, but given that definition, they are. So, now on to number 4, ancestral advice. Imagine your entrepreneurial forebears being in the room with you and giving you advice. So, for example, let's try Ben Franklin. He was crazy. He was an interesting guy. What kind of advice would Ben Franklin give you in your business? Actually, the forebears of this country in general, most of them were entrepreneurs to some extent. They were agricultural entrepreneurs mostly, but Ben Franklin was an inventor. Um, Leonardo da Vinci. You don't think of him as an entrepreneur, but he kind of was. I mean, the face of entrepreneurism has changed a lot over time. I mean, nowadays it means something very different than maybe it did in the 18th century, 17th century, whatever. But and you don't even have to go, let's say your grandpa was an entrepreneur. What would your grandpa tell you? My grandpa was not an entrepreneur. I assume I have entrepreneurs somewhere in my family, but none that I know specifically that I've met. They go back a ways. Anyway, so that's something you can do. They don't even have to be your ancestors, honestly. I mean, Ben Franklin isn't mine. There you go. And number 5, and this one is my favorite. I call it quirky quotations. So what you do is and it's really you can do this, is you go on the internet, go to Google, and you look for unusual or little known quotes, and you build chapters, sections, blog posts, social media posts around that quote. That could be really fun because I mean, for example, a quote I used in an earlier episode when I was talking about author advice is, and I love this quote from Douglas Adams. It says, I love deadlines. I love the sound of them whooshing by. That's kind of a whimsical, quirky thing. I mean, it's a more common quote. People quote it a lot, but that's the kind of idea. It's sort of quirky ways that people have thought about things and then use that as a leaping off point for some thought or some fun. Maybe it's a fun Friday. So there you go, 5 whimsical ways to jumpstart your creativity and give your writing and your business a little variety. Again, that's word weaving wizardry, idea incubator, sensory writing sessions, ancestral advice, and quirky quotations. This is your host, Carma Spence, saying ciao for now. I'll see you next week.